Are you more of a brightly clad, sword-wind aspect warrior of Biel-Tan, or a scheming, sombre seer of Ulthwe? Let's talk through the options for picking an Eldar craft world in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Craftworld Eldar once more, and we're going to be going through the recently updated Codex's choices, and a few thoughts as to which craft worlds you might want to run in-game, with a bit of a nod to the lore behind the scenes as well. I have made a previous video on this one, but seeing as the new Codex has come out with completely new rules that have flipped a lot of things on the head, I thought we'd make an update. In the video we'll talk over the lore and background of each craft world, what options and choices they have for bringing in game at the moment, and roughly how strong I will consider them in current 40k. First we'll go through the 5 big ones from the Codex, then the shadowy Eldar of Altansar, talk through the Ynnari and how they differ to the standard craft worlds, and then talk about the minor custom craft worlds which are actually incredibly powerful in-game. Loads to talk about, so let's jump straight into it. First and perhaps foremost amongst the craft worlds plying the stars are Biel-Tan. This militant and aggressive craft world takes to the battlefield in green livery, often with thorn motifs, and among all the craft worlds in their faded glory, the Biel-Tan are perhaps the most optimistic and aggressive, making war with the aim to return the Eldar to be the dominant species in the galaxy, and reclaim the stars from the usurpers. To this end, the path of the warrior is abnormally popular among the Eldar of Biel-Tan. There's many aspect warriors in their ranks, and in battle they employ the sword wind, the brutal swift striking formation bringing enormous pressure to bear, often making great use of dire avengers and shuriken weaponry. They perhaps awaken their craft world's dormant avatar more often than most, and it will often take to the field, alongside the court of the Young King, a council of exarchs of enormous tactical acumen and power. In recent times, Biel-Tan itself was fractured, as it bore the brunt of an enormous demon incursion and the awakening of the god of the dead, Iyanden, though it doesn't seem to have dulled the fiery spirits of the Eldar of Biel-Tan. In-game, this manifests itself in their craftworld attribute, the Sword Wind. This allows them to basically move a bit faster and hit a bit harder. Advance and battle-focused rolls of 1 and 2 always counter for 3, basically ensuring you against rolling super low. And you get to re-roll a single hit roll per attack as well, which means that all the units will typically strike just a little bit more powerful than normal. It means they're particularly good with lance weapons and anything that's really high power single shots as well. The battle focus and advance thing is kind of useful. I guess if you're out of terrain, then you can at least guarantee that you're going to be falling back a decent distance, so they should have a pretty decent capacity for popping out, shooting, and then hiding safe again. Otherwise, their warlord trait is a particularly good one. Natural Leader allows you to just select one core unit for 4 rerolls to hit, really nice if you're using Guide for something else, and this one isn't one that your opponent's going to be able to deny. The Spirit Stone of Anathlon is a nice upgrade for a Psyker. It allows you to know an extra power and reroll 1 psychic test per turn as well, so extra flexibility, extra reliability. And finally, their stratagem for 1 CP is Wrath of the Shrines. This allows you to get exploding 6s to hit with an aspect warrior unit, particularly if you chuck that onto a really big unit of Dire Avengers or Howling Banshees or something, you're going to see some scary results. Overall, I think this adds up to Biel-Tan being a pretty well-rounded and strong craft world. It's one of the more played ones competitively, with a pretty reasonable attribute and a good warlord trait, relic and stratagem, all of which are pretty usable. Maybe not the absolute top of the tree, but still very solid. In any case, if you want to reject the decline of the Eldar and take back the galaxy anew, then Craftworld Biel-Tan might appeal. Next up, we have Alaitoc the Starstriders, a craftworld that's famed for its soft power and abilities to misdirect and manipulate the lesser races, all to better further their goals. The actual craft world of Alaitoc itself is unusually puritanical, cutting off almost all ties with the other craft worlds, holding their citizens to abnormally high standards even amongst the Eldari, and this conversely leads to quite a lot of its members abandoning the craft world, choosing to travel the path of the outcast and become rangers. These loosely affiliated outcasts are very useful in times of war, giving Alaitoc eyes and ears where they by all rights shouldn't be able to find things, and in battle they make great use of holotechnology, distortion fields, and other things to hide their warriors from the enemy's eyes, misdirecting the foe, and springing deadly ambushes and assassinations with their rangers and pathfinders and their Eldar long rifles. The aim is to keep the enemy on the back foot at all times, and unable to take the fight to the craft worlders directly. In-game, their shadowy tendencies manifest itself in fieldcraft, light cover at greater than 12 inches away, which is actually quite a nice survivability boost to their vehicles at range. It's most meaningful on anything with higher saves. Infantry and bikers are a bit harder to shift in terrain as well. They get dense cover if they're already in terrain as well. So a nice easy way to pick up -1 to hit and not have to use the stratagem to access it. When traversing terrain, they're also a little bit faster as well, being able to move through terrain without any penalty. It means they can easily escape into woods and things, and not feel too bad about hiding in there, and maybe shortening enemy charges by doing so. Pretty useful survivability stuff on the whole, a bit more meaningful against enemy ranged armies rather than melee ones. Otherwise, their warlord trait is Master of Ambush, a core infantry unit that's less than 9 inches can shoot while doing actions, and you get to redeploy one ranger unit anywhere that's greater than 9 inches from enemy models and the enemy's deployment zone. I guess you could achieve that with Phantasm, but having it baked in isn't the worst anyway. If your opponent does seize the first turn, it could well be worth pulling those rangers back. Their relic is the Shift Shroud of Altansar, infantry only, and you can't be shot while in cover unless you're the closest model or within 12 inches. Perhaps doesn't hurt on something like a Farseer to keep them a bit safer, and occasionally could be a powerful way to claim home objectives while your opponent not being able to target them at all. Their stratagem for 1 command point is Pathfinder Ambush. This allows you to intercept the enemy with a unit of rangers for 1 command point. It's not too bad, but generally rangers aren't going to do the most massive amount of damage unless they're buffed up by a lot of other things. And it's got a quirky special rule where if you happen to have a ranger unit in reserve, you could have them arrive on the field and then also immediately shoot the enemy unit. I think it's okay, but in general you're going to need to have a fairly fragile enemy unit for it to be all that meaningful. Finally, Alaitoc get access to Illic Night Spear, their unique special character who's got a massive sniper rifle. I feel it's perhaps a little bit on the expensive side for 90 points, but I guess it's a bit more meaningful now the bodyguard rules aren't as powerful anymore, and it's quite a good one for keying in an auto wound roll with the Strands of Fate dice. That means that your opponent's going to be taking D3 mortal wounds from his sniper rifle Voidbringer, and then saving a save on AP-3 to take another flat 3 if they fail that. Overall, in power terms, I'd rank Alaitoc kind of medium. I think their Craftworld attribute is pretty handy, and Illic isn't bad. Their warlord trait, relic, and stratagem all just seem a little bit on the weaker side compared with some of the other options, though. I feel if you're making a force that's themed around a bunch of rangers, or a whole load of vehicles that you want to misdirect enemies with your holy fields and extra toughness, then maybe Alaitoc could be a pretty good choice. Moving on, we come to Ulthwe the Damned, the black-clad and somber guardians, whose Craftworld has taken it upon itself to try and contain the forces of chaos within the Eye of Terror for millennia, leaving them to be less trusted by the other Craftworlds, and they do seem to manifest an enormous amount of psychers within their number compared with the other Craftworlds. Their end goal is to achieve ultimate victory over chaos, something that Eldrad Ulthuan, arguably the greatest living Eldar psyker, is trying to achieve in the Awakening of Enid, in the hope that the God of the Dead can defeat Slaanesh once and for all. When they make war, they typically do so as Black Guardian strike forces, large amounts of martial citizenry, deep striking from the webway, and tend to have relatively fewer aspect warriors compared with some of their peers. It's to be rare that an Ulthwe force doesn't make war without a good number of seers amongst its ranks. Seer councils comprising of good numbers of warlocks and farseers direct their forces and guide the enemy warriors to a grisly fate. In game, all this vigil and psychic oversight really seems to have worked out for the Ulthwe. They have a whole ton of benefits on their Craftworld attribute, which is called Foresight of the Damned. First up, they get to reroll 1 wound roll per attack, so typically are just going to be a bit more dangerous in shooting in melee than you'd expect normally, and again particularly with high strength weapons. Then they go on to each psyker getting +1 to cast its first spell every turn, a really nice benefit on a faction with so many powerful psychic abilities. Everyone gets a 6+ invul save as well. It is only relevant on certain units, but is pretty nice on low save things like Guardians. And then to cap it off, they're a lot harder to kill with mortal wounds, getting a 5+ save against them, which is kind of no small deal in current 40k, where a lot of factions have decent access to them. In general, it's just a really solid all-round package, a bit more damage, better psychic, and a bit tougher. Their warlord trait is Fate Reader. This allows you to retain 1 additional Strands of Fate dice each turn. Certainly useful enough, but I would bear in mind that it's usually going to be the one that you'd find one of the least useful. The relic is the Ghost Helm of Alizar. Their relic is the Ghost Helm of Alashazia. A psychic model knows 1 extra psychic power, and if you manage to cast on a 9+, then it goes off undeniable. Though to be honest, it would be kind of hard to deny if you're casting that high anyway. Not sure I rate it quite as high as the Biel-Tan one, but certainly doesn't hurt. Their stratagem though is just very easy to use and a nice direct damage boost. 1 CP for Discipline of the Black Guardians gives you +1 to hit with a Guardians unit. Pretty excellent on big blocks of deep striking guardians out of the webway, solid on decent sized squadrons of wind riders, and can be kind of nice on support weapon platforms as well. It seems like it could be worth the command point boost if you're using it on things like D cannons. Finally, to cap it all off, we have Eldrad Ulthwe himself. He's a slightly more expensive Farseer at 145 points, and he's just a spectacularly reliable caster, casting 3 different psychic powers, and he gets to re-roll a psychic test, so you're pretty reliable in getting them off. He also allows a little bit more strands of fate manipulation, which doesn't hurt, and has a slightly boosted staff. Overall, I feel like he's quite solid in the lineup compared with other Farseers. Overall, I'd currently rank Ulthwe as one of the very strongest Craftworlds that you could pick, mainly just due to that Craftworld attribute being pretty much useful on just about every unit in your army, and the stratagem is very nice on Guardians, which are already quite solid units in themselves. Overall, if you want a powerful army of black-clad Guardians and somber Psykers that just do everything a little bit better than most of the other Eldar, then maybe Ulthwe might be for you. Iyanden next, and they are a Craftworld of Ghost Warriors, reduced to a shadow of their former glory by the incursion of High Fleet Kraken. The proud Eldar of Iyanden underestimated the sheer ferocity and numbers of one of the splinter fleets of the Kraken, and quite possibly would have been wiped out in their entirety if it hadn't been for the timely intervention of the Corsair Prince Iriel, returning from exile, taking up the cursed spear of Twilight, and leading his forces to cast back the monstrous bioforms. After the disaster, the burning shrine of Iyanden was greatly diminished, and they're now forced to make great use of ancestor ghost warriors, reawakening their fallen kin in Wraithbone form, and in battle a great number of Wraithguard, Wraithblades and Wraithlords stride amongst their ranks. In-game, Iyanden have the Stoic Endurance Craftworld attribute, plus 1 to their combat attrition rolls, so they're not very likely to run away, and AP-1 and AP-2 weapons both have slightly reduced AP compared with normal. It's an okay durability boost, it's going to be meaningful against some armies that go heavy on those weapons, but pretty useless against others. The Warlord trait grants them a 5+ Feel No Pain, which is a decent survivability boost, though Eldar aren't exactly best known for their durability if they are exposed to enemy fire. The Citronome of Iyanden is quite good for empowering big blocks of Wraithguard or Wraithblades. The Wraithblades gain +1 attack, and Wraithguard can battle focus, so move, shoot, move. For 1 command point, their stratagem is Guided Wraithsight. A Spirit Seer grants their Spirit Mark ability to any spirit host on the battlefield. Basically, that's some reroll 1s exactly where you need them, so it can be quite good to broadcast that to somewhere if they are out of range. And finally, they can fill their special character in Prince Iriel. He's a 90-point character with the Spear of Twilight, which is a flat 3 damage melee weapon. He does the normal autarch things, such as allowing you to get more command point rerolls and allow you to reroll hit rolls of 1 nearby. And as the only Corsair HQ model, it is interesting that you could potentially lead a Corsair detachment if you wanted him to. I guess he's not too bad if you mainly wanted the rerolls and a slightly fightier character, though not being able to pick your own relics and warlord traits is a little bit sad. Overall, I think it adds up to Iyanden being one of the weaker main Craftworlds. The Wraith units at the moment aren't terrible, though people generally prefer 1 or 2 Wraith Lords as opposed to mass Wraith spam, and perhaps the most annoying thing about their durability buff is that it's really quite situational. If you are playing against an army that's spamming masses of AP-1 or 2 weapons, then it will generally be quite a good thing. But if you're fighting a lot of AP0 or higher AP stuff, then it's going to be completely meaningless. Still though, if you want a furious army of golden and blue ghost warriors, then maybe Iyanden is still the right choice. Next up we come to the wild riding clans of the Eldar of Saim-Hann. These are the Eldar that seem to have got the memo from the orcs that red ones go faster, and they make war at dizzying breakneck speeds from the backs of their jet bikes and grav tanks. The symbol of Saim-Hann is the Eldar serpent, which represents the quest for enlightenment, though amongst the other Eldar Craftworlds they do have a reputation for being more hot-headed and brash, and maybe a little bit more likely to try and settle problems with breathtaking displays of martial prowess and skill, rather than take the more discreet path to military engagements. Their Craftworld attribute is Wild Host. It allows you to reroll charge rolls across the entire army, and also fall back and charge as well. It basically means that Saim-Hann armies are going to be well geared to getting into melee, and extra good at falling back and then jumping into other annoying combats if the enemy has failed to kill any Eldar that are engaged at the end of their turn. I'm not really the biggest fan of their attribute, to be honest. Rerolling charge rolls could be good for threat range on things like Howling Banshees and things, but the fallback and charge is often just a bit redundant, as any Craftworld can do that for command points if they desperately need to. If you want a beatstick melee character for Eldar though, then Saim-Hann are one of the best ways to achieve that. The Wild Rider Chieftain trait gives them +1 attack and a 6-inch heroic intervention, so they'll be quite good at holding down certain objectives, and their relic is the Talisman of Tion Shah. If you charge or make a heroic intervention, you get an extra pip of strength, an extra pip of damage, and an extra -1 pip of AP. That's really quite brutal stuff on something like an Autarch with a Starglaive, or perhaps a jet bike mounted one wielding a laser lance. Finally, an excellent use for the Shining Spears in general. For 1 command point, you've got Warriors of the Raging Winds. This allows biker units to advance and charge, and if you combine that with the reroll charge rolls, it means that your average threat range for a unit of Saim-Hann Shining Spears is a crazy 30 inches for just 1 CP. If you want to just catapult a deadly unit of Aspect Warriors from your deployment zone into the enemies, then this is perhaps the single easiest way to do so. Overall, I'd say that Saim-Hann does have some useful options, but they just feel a little bit one-dimensional. Kind of a shame that none of their stuff actually really helps out their classic Guardian jet bikes. They basically just seem all about just having massive threat ranges on things like Howling Banshees or Shining Spears, perhaps led by one fighty Autarch. Don't get me wrong, I think that could be potentially strong, but I don't think it's necessarily enough to make them one of the standout Craftworlds. Still though, if you like zippy red painted grav tanks and jet bikes, then Saim-Hann is pretty excellent for that, and repeatedly throwing shining spears at the enemy with crazy threat ranges sounds absolutely excellent. Next up for the Craftworlds, we have the shadowy Eldar of Altansar. These guys weren't released in the main codex, but came out in a White Dwarf supplement that dropped at the same time as Codex Eldari. It might therefore not be the easiest to get your hands on a current copy of the rules, but I'm sure it's the sort of thing that's quite easy to Google online. Lore-wise, they're a Craftworld that survived the fall, but was too close to the Eye of Terror and was drawn back into it during the birth of Slaanesh and the destruction of the main Eldar Empire. They were thought to be destroyed and lost in the warp for millennia, and the sole survivor from the Craftworld was the Phoenix Lord Morgan-Ra, who travelled the other worlds and founded Dark Reaper aspect shrines on many of the other Craftworlds. During the subsidence in the warp storms that allowed Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade out of the Eye, the Phoenix Lords dove into the Eye of Terror, taking with him a small cadre of elite warriors. Against all the odds, he found the Craftworld embattled but intact within the Eye, and was able to navigate them out of the depths of the warp storms and to take up their place amongst their kin. If the Eldar of Ulthwe are mistrusted amongst their peers though, then it's on a whole different level for Altansar. Very few believe that they can have been enduring millennia within the Eye of Terror itself, and haven't been irrevocably corrupted from whatever form they once were on entering it. Rules-wise, they get a Craftworld attribute made up of the custom Craftworlds table that we'll get onto in a second. It's called Grim Survivors, and on the first round of melee you get an extra pip of AP, and you get +1 to combat attrition tests. As attributes go, I don't really think it's the strongest one. A lot of the most meaningful Eldar melee units are pretty high AP already, things like Shining Spears or Howling Banshees for example. I guess maybe it's most used on something like Storm Guardians or Striking Scorpions. Due to getting an entire external supplement dedicated to them, they are actually quite well supported in terms of warlord traits, relics and stratagems, though I would say that most of them are on the fairly tame side. The warlord traits can give you a bit of extra psychic defense, an extra psychic deny and re-rolling one, and a different one gives you the option for one core unit gets a 6 auto to wound with Shuriken's ability, which is a pretty meaningful damage boost if you put it on something like a unit of Wind Riders, Dire Avengers, or a big block of Guardians. They've got a couple of relics, a Saviour Stone which allows you to manipulate the Strands of Fate, and one that allows a core unit to reroll advance and charge rolls, and then perhaps one of the biggest draws to the faction, 4 different unique stratagems, one for wounding better against demons, one for objective secured that pops up at the start of the command phase, one to give you an extra AP on rocket weapons, and a rather nice one that gives you a 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds in the psychic phase. Quite a nice one for combating your Grey Knights, Tyranids, and Thousand Sons. Out of those, I think maybe the most game-changing is the objective secured thing. It means that you've got a lot more potential for just swiping an objective from under your opponent's nose, pretty much trading some command points for victory points straight out. Overall though, I would say it still amounts to being one of the weaker Craftworlds, mainly because of the poor attribute, though it definitely gives you the option to field a pretty different Craftworld with a fair bit of extra support compared with the other custom ones. Leaving the main Craftworlds behind, we have the Forces of the Ynnari. These are the death-obsessed worshippers of Enid, the god of the dead awakened by the ritual of Eldrad Ulthran, absorbing the souls of the slain Eldar, and gradually gaining power until they will be able to challenge Slaanesh once and for all. Many have answered the call of the Ynnari, drawing warriors from the Craftworlds, Drukhari, and the Harlequins, and when they make war they tend to have a preference for melee weapons, their warriors boosted to superhuman speed and strength even for an Eldar, and empowered by the souls of their fallen comrades. The Ynnari have rather a lot of unique rules within Codex Eldar. Detachment-wise, they have a fairly fun rule which allows them to soup in Harlequins or Witch Cult or Cabal units, so you can have some fun mixed detachments going on. Each time you include one of those units though, you must have a Azayani standard Craftworld unit of the same battlefield role, so maybe you could take a unit of Guardians, then a unit of Kabbalite warriors if you wanted to. There's a whole load of other restrictions and benefits for the Ynnari. You lose access to the powerful Runes of Fate, though you can use Fortune. A lot of the special rules of the different armies are phased out. Harlequins can't take pivotal roles, Drukhari can't take Lords of Comera, you can't take the Avatar of Cain, Phoenix Lords, Corsairs, the Solitaire, or named characters. You can't mix and match codexes within transports, and you can take a couple of the Drukhari Blades for hire, the Scourges and the Incubi, but they cost quite a bit more. For all of those trade-offs, your Psykers gain access to the Revenant discipline. I'd argue that some of the most interesting spells from this are Word of the Phoenix to heal slain models to your squads, Shield of Anise to give one unit a 4+ invul, and Ancestor's Grace to give you +1 to wound in melee. You are trading out powerful options like Guide, Doom and Fortune for this though, so it's still not exactly all win on the psychic front. Otherwise, their equivalent of Craftworld attribute is Strength from Death. This allows them to fight first in melee and gives them +1 to hit if their unit has taken casualties. They're both kind of situational things to be honest. Fights first is okay, but if you're charging you'd have it anyway, and the +1 to hit's only going to be relevant if the opponent half kills a squad and doesn't just wipe them. The Warlord's got a slightly weird combo of regenerating a wound and giving you an extra attack and strength in melee when you're fighting against injured units. The Relic makes you a bit tougher, giving you -1 damage and +1 save against damage 1 weapons, and for 1 command point, their stratagem Inevitable Fate gives you +1 to wound if Ynnari units target an enemy unit that's below half strength. A powerful boost, but again it's going to be super situational what you can actually target with that. Finally, and maybe one of the single biggest draws to the faction, are the 3 unique characters, Ivrain, the Vizarch, and the Avatar of the Incarn. Out of these, I feel that the Incarn is by far the most interesting. Really quite tough with 12 wounds and a half damage mechanic. It can cast a bit of psychic, fights really hard in combat with a sword that ignores invuls, and has that fun mechanic where it can bounce around the board if a unit has been slain. The other 2 are okay, basically variants on a Farseer and a Autarch. You get some extra abilities, but do get some trade-offs for using them over the generic forms. Overall, despite a big rules glow-up and having thought through everything rather well compared with before, Ynnari do seem to be still on the weaker side. I'd argue that for a lot of lists, what you're giving up probably outweighs what you're gaining in return, but you definitely gain access to a whole bunch of different tools that might get you to play in a different way, and the Avatar in particular does seem really quite solid. If you do want to field a mixed Eldar death cult though, then the Ynnari seem like a pretty fun choice for some modelling things and combining all the miniatures that you like the most from multiple different Eldar factions. Finally, if you want to go your own way and create a craft world all of your own, there are rules for doing that as well, or representing some of the other minor craft worlds which are present in the lore. A few of the better known minor craft worlds are Ilkaith, constant crusaders against chaos, readily allying with mankind or Comera as needed, and perhaps a lot more pragmatic than some of their loftier kin. Ibrazel is a largely matriarchal society aiming to recover the secrets of the Chrome Worlds, and Lugganath are a craft world of mainly renegades and raiders who wish to abandon the galaxy entirely and claim the webway alone as their domain. If you wanted to represent any of these or make up your own lore, then you can combine 2 traits from a very long list. I did go over those in full in the Eldar Craft Worlds Codex review I did. As the list stands though, the Hail of Doom Shuriken buff does seem to be by far the standout pick, and it's seeing a lot of play competitively, as it basically dials up any shuriken weapon that you've got and makes it into a far more dangerous gun. Hail of Doom allows you to get 6s to hit with shuriken weapons to count as an unmodified wound roll of 6, which means that not only do you get the free wound off, but you also get the extra AP that you'd get for rolling that 6. Shuriken weapons are mid-strength and fairly high numbers of shots, so they typically do very well against things like hordes already, but this makes them into true general-purpose damage dealers that can also be very scary to things like heavy armor. It's also particularly strong with things like Guide as well. You basically just get to re-roll all the dice and fish for as many 6s as you can, and then still hopefully punch through a bit more with any wound rolls that you need to make. Currently, a lot of people are spamming big units of Dire Avengers, Guardian jet bikes, and deep striking Guardian bombs with this, and you also get to combine it with one of the other Craftworld traits as well, and hopefully pick up another advantage that way. For combining it with, perhaps two of the most common picks are things like mobile fighters for +1 to wound on units disembarking from transports. If you're going down the route of wave serpents, then it makes sense to just cram a whole load of Dire Avengers into them and let rip. But otherwise, masterful shots is a really nice one. Ignoring light cover just means that your shuriken weapons are going to do a lot more damage against entrenched hard targets, so it seems like another easy one to combine. There's a whole load of other good ones though, some of which are really general purpose, some are a bit situational. Masters of Concealment could take a leaf out of Alaitoc's book and get your light cover at greater than 12 inches away. Superior shurikens could increase the range of those shuriken weapons at +3 inches. Children of Prophecy makes your psykers actually significantly better at casting, re-rolling 1s or 2s on psychic tests and denials. That one is crazily good for psykers, as that's usually the results that's going to make you fail the tests, or just the nice solid expert crafters, re-roll 1 wound roll each time you attack, again a very nice damage boost, though one that favours heavier weapons more. I typically want to combine one of those with Hail of Doom, and off you go build the army around that. Just in general, it can be quite rewarding to come up with your own Craftworld lore and colour scheme, as then you can basically just pick and choose between the craft worlds that you want to play, and use the rules that best represent your fluff or fighting style. So anyway, I think we'll leave that there then. Hope you've enjoyed a bit of a rundown of the craft worlds in 9th edition. Let me know which one your favourite is, or which one you choose to play, down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to have new ones coming out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find it down in the video description. Making all the content does take a fair amount of time and effort, so if you are enjoying quite a bit, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.